We're all aware that at an event like this, the most important work takes place before and after the meeting. So I know that a lot of important business is being transacted, but if people could find seats, we're going to start in just a minute. So in starting this welcome,
My wife had such a nice visit with you.
I want to particularly thank the Pew Charitable Trust for giving us really this remarkable location today, which is available for nonprofits. And those of you with wonderful nonprofits, could I urge you to use this place? It really is quite beautiful, and it's wonderful for us today. We have about 140 seats in this room, and there are 200 people who have RSVP'd. So there is an overflow room, just so you know it. There's a second overflow room that people can use where there'll be video streaming. And also during lunch, and we'll have an announcement about this later, there will be 2 sessions during the lunch discussion, one in this room and one in the second room we'll be describing later. Anyway, I'm Jeff Cowan. I'm the president of the Annenberg Foundation Trust at Sunnylands, and it's a great pleasure for me to be able to welcome you on behalf of our team of partners and to thank you for coming. This room contains so many people who have been deeply involved and really been making a difference in terms of the worlds of education and technology. Sunnylands, probably many of you know, was created by Walter and Leonore Annenberg, who had a special passion for education, as it was their winter home in Rancho Mirage near Palm Springs. And they created an operating foundation that would have 2 functions. One, it's a spectacular place to visit, as some of you know who've been there, and I urge the rest of you to come. And also to have small meetings that would really make a difference in the world. And of course, as you all know, we recently hosted the President of the United States, the President of China, in a small meeting that we hope will make a difference. And one of our major interests has been in technology and education. And we, for the last year and a half, in partnership with some of the people in the room, been working on math education and technology. And we've been partnering with the LEAD Commission with their tremendous work on technology and education. So our partners today are the LEAD Commission, Common Sense Media, and the New Schools Venture Fund. And those of you who don't know Ted Mitchell, you'll be meeting him later, but many of you live here in the district, and you should know that you have a new partner here in the district in Ted Mitchell, who's just moved here. Ted, where are you, so people know to become your friend? Ted Mitchell, sitting back there, now a resident, and a big asset to this community now. We have a goal today, which is that we actually hope that this very important area will take a step forward, that will move the needle forward a little bit more today. We know that there's a lot to be done. You'll be hearing about what so many people think can be done, and the challenge today is to get a little bit closer to really making it happen. A couple of housekeeping things. There's web streaming going on. This is open to the press, and there are press people here. There's a hashtag for people who like to tweet. You can find it in your program, the hashtag for this event. I think the whole event during the day should be a lot of fun, but we also have a real schedule that we're trying to keep to, so I urge each of the panels to do so. For our first panel, we are so fortunate to have a terrific team with us. Our moderator for the day is for this morning, is Chelsea Clinton. If anybody doesn't know her, you can leave now. But Chelsea's achievements include being the vice chair of the Annenberg, of course.
Oh, thank you.
I knew you were looking for an endowment.
I am. So we can talk afterwards.
Of the Clinton Foundation, being a special correspondent for NBC. But today, what's really particularly relevant for all of us is that she's a board member, as am I, of Common Sense Media. Please join me in welcoming Chelsea Clinton. She'll be moderating this first session, and the other people on the panel with her will be Steve Case, who many of you know. If you've got mail, you know Steve Case. But you also know that he's been a major philanthropist and an investor in a lot of things in this technology space. And Steve, thank you so much for being here. Please join me in welcoming Steve Case. And then two people who have really been instrumental in this whole area. Jim Steyer, known to many people from many different activities, including being the president of Common Sense Media. But today he's here in his role as the co-chair of the lead commission, and his partner in this particular crime, Jim Coulter, who of course is known to all of you from his role as the CEO of the Texas Pacific Group, does so many important things in the world, but the other, another co-chair of the lead commission. Please join me in welcoming all of them to the stage for this first session. Thank you.
You got your haircut.
I did.
Hi, Jim. Nice to see you. I was just commenting that Jim got his haircut.
And I said,
For this.
it was for you, Chelsea.
Oh, thank you. I was thinking it was for all of us.
That's cut?
Yes, I know. Different standards in California.
Correct. That is good.
Thank you all for being here with us today. This is something that clearly we're all here to have a conversation about that probably is overdue. And I hope one of the things that we can talk about this morning and then throughout the day is how do we solve for tomorrow with what we know today. When I think about my first computer from Santa Claus, so thank you, Santa Claus, in 1987, it was a Commodore computer. My first email account was AOL. And yet when I think about what my 18 nieces and nephews use, none of that is even in their lexicon or their memory. And so I hope that we can talk about how do we solve for technology in the classroom to ensure that we have good digital citizens, but also kind of productive digital students well into the 21st century, even though we're still relatively at the beginning. But before we get into our conversation this morning, I want to hand it over to Jim to talk about the Lead Commission, about their work and about where they are at the moment.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chelsea, and it's a pleasure to be here. My personal journey on this, which has been about a 2-year journey through educational technology, has been one of the most interesting and challenging intellectual paths I've been through. And I've come to believe that we are really on the precipice of an interesting time for our nation, for our children. And as I've gone through that journey, I look around the room here, many of my heroes that I've met along the way are here. So as I make a few of the comments that I've been asked to make today to set the context, I want to acknowledge those heroes and know that many of you taught me these things, but let me set them out so that we can begin what will hopefully be a useful conversation today. A couple of context. This was probably one of the slides I ran across along the way that reminds me why we're here. 2005 to 2013, 2 popes being named. And I want you to see the difference in St. Peter's Square. Over an 8-year period, we began a journey and moved along a journey where events are not only experienced, they're shared and shared on a global basis. We see this time and time again in all parts of our life, and yet as we walk into classrooms today, the picture remains St. Peter's Square maybe decades ago. So as we began this journey at Lee, we began to ask the question of why? Why is it not moving faster? Why is the change that people like Steve have driven in other industries not happening fast enough here? And can we as a nation afford that not to happen? Another look that I stole from the provost at Stanford University when we were talking about this at the board level. There have been few revolutions in education, from monks to printing presses. The last one actually occurred probably in the 1870s, and we all think of it probably as the assembly line basis of education. We were able to lower the cost of education by moving people through seat time across their educational career. Great way to reduce costs in education, huge way to create access around the world. The problem is we all know, particularly in this room, that it's not how kids learn. So knowing that that revolution was there and knowing that we're seeing it in every other business that those of us in the commercial sector hit, what can we do to move it forward in education? in doing so, we have to actually challenge some of the cherished beliefs we all have about education. One of the things I found is the reason it's moving so slowly is all of us were educated in a certain way, and it's a hard thing to actually move away from your own experience. H.M. Warner, who the hell wants to hear actors talk? There's no need for individuals to have a computer in their home. Sometimes people closest to it are the people who can't see the necessary action in front of us. So what we're here about today, Kelsey, what I hope you'll lead us on the conversation is how do we put the cherished beliefs on the table and move forward. As Jim and I did this, a few observations, you've seen our work. We are finally at the tipping point. Chelsea and Commodore, you may have done probably your first learning was the Oregon Trail. I don't know if you ever
I
did
loved
that.
Oregon Trail.
The Oregon Trail.
Carmen San Diego was my favorite, though.
So some big moves along the way, but we are finally reaching the promise where it is no longer an and question. In other words, textbooks and technology. Or it's no longer an or question. We can do both, and we can do it within a textbook budget. This is a massive change in the questions that we're facing. This is a broken market. Steve, you and I have been in a lot of different markets. I've done airlines, healthcare, et cetera. I have never seen a market as difficult and as broken and as fragmented in many ways as this particular market. And if we come up with great technology and we can't find a way to market, it will not be successful. We think of it as a consumer market. We're going to put up a bunch of apps and people are going to use them. In fact, technology is an enterprise market. You have to sell solutions. Wedges. One of the realizations all of us have in our own home, as soon as someone gets a smartphone in the house, it's about 2 years before everyone in the home wants a smartphone, maybe 2 months in some cases. We've had a big problem in this industry as to how does it get to market? Where do we start? And this was the biggest surprise for me. I'm a free markets guy. I thought when we started this process that it was going to be about free market acceleration. What became clear, and I found myself later in the White House and in front of the Senate, is that this is actually a national problem that needs national action, and education is not something that we have traditionally acted nationally. And lastly, this was the part that scared me most. As I went around the world, Jim Steyer and I visited education ministers in several places. As I watched as the Prime Minister of Turkey flew to the U.S. to buy 10 million units of tablets and took the various various device manufacturers and played them off each other for a 10 million unit order, that somehow other countries were better positioned to move on this than we were. The thing that made our education system great, local involvement, was the very thing that was probably holding us back as this market developed. So this is a moment that on a competitive international basis we have what we've come to call a Sputnik moment. And these are some of the issues we'll touch on today. These are observations. You all have others that you would probably add to it. But this need for action, the cost of not doing something has become highly visible in our work. So we won't spend a lot of time this day, but we can touch on them as you choose. The recommendations we came forward with are comprehensive, probably much larger in nature than we originally anticipated, because one of the things, and Steve, you can probably comment on this, we've learned in technology is you have to move the whole ecosystem forward. For years, there was a question about how music would be delivered digitally, but until you had the iPod and iTunes and the record companies all working together, nothing happened for many years. So we can't just wire the schools, we can't just give kids devices, we can't just have great courseware, we have to do all of them together. And that ecosystem movement is the challenge that the people in this room are really facing today. So I give that as some context for the discussions today. It's a big job. Luckily, it's a very big very big outcome if we do it well. And for me, and this is one of the things that's kept me focused on it, I believe it offers the most viable path to national education reform out there. We've seen it disrupt every other industry in positive ways. It will disrupt education, and if we get it right, it will disrupt education in a way that we'll look back and realize was pivotal for the system.
Jim, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to echo actually what Jim just said in terms of the fact that many of our colleagues who helped us build the recommendations for the lead commissioner are in this room today. And so thanks very much to all of you guys for being part of this. I think that Jim hit the nail on the head here. I mean, this is a Sputnik moment. You know, it's interesting, Chelsea, you were talking about Carmen Sandiego and Oregon Trail. I remember teaching in classrooms in East Oakland in the early 90s and watching the kids, 35 kids in a classroom, one teacher, watching those kids really relate to that stuff and thinking, if we could just figure out how to turn this into a mass scale, you could revolutionize education, most of all for the kids who need it the most. These are the worst schools in East Oakland, which that's, in terms of low schools, that's cutting it pretty low. And I remember watching those kids and the engagement they had and the opportunity for learning and thinking, this is what should happen. And Jim, 20 years later, it's actually happening. And I look around the room and there's some of the true pioneers in the field in this room. Jeff over there basically has done this in the state of Maine as a pioneer. So many people in the room. So we set out 5 basic objectives. And I think Jim's correct. This is a Sputnik moment. And these are the way we sort of frame it. And I hope this will frame the discussion we have today. Because if we can do all of these in order and sequentially, I think the impact on the lives of our kids, particularly the kids in the bottom 50% in our country, will be dramatically transformed for the better. The first is something that we all need to work on right now, which is dealing with the infrastructure issue and the fact that we don't have sufficient broadband in every classroom in the United States. So we've come out with this recommendation. President Obama went to North Carolina, where's Mark, with Mark, and visited Mark. I was there with Mark and Secretary Duncan back in June, and he announced his Connect Ed plan. We're going to hear a little later this morning and then this afternoon also from the folks who run the FCC. So this is something that builds off the E-rate program that was introduced originally in the late 90s. And we have an opportunity now to finally solve the infrastructure issue in every classroom. And Jim's point, this can be done with national action. We think it will be, and I actually believe that the people in this room here, literally this room, are probably people are going to drive that change. But you cannot get everything else we need done if we do not get the wiring and the infrastructure in place. So that is job one, and it has to happen. And I believe we have national political momentum. It's going to happen. But the people in this room are probably going to be the group of people who make it happen. The second piece is we're going to need devices. I mean, I was going to pull this out, but in some ways, as the father of 4, at least my youngest, this will probably be the backpack for him or a tablet in a year or 2. And we're now seeing schools going one-to-one all across this country. As Jim mentioned, when we were in Singapore and Korea and elsewhere, we saw other countries that are ahead of us in this. But the device issue is going to be critical. Again, that's one where we believe the market will solve it, and where with the right kind of incentives, that kind of transformation can happen very, very quickly as long as the incentives are put in the right place. So third piece here is going to be the creation of curriculum. Again, we think that primarily as a market-driven solution. There's extraordinary stuff out there now, whether it's apps, games, courseware, websites. Many of the people in this room are very, very familiar with this area. At Common Sense, we've built a whole new learning rating system that we believe is critical to the ability of teachers and districts and principals to be able to make the purchasing decisions about extraordinary new digital curriculum that can transform the classroom. So that is the third big element that we believe needs to happen. The fourth is, we've certainly learned this in our visits to countries around the world that are a bit ahead of us at this point, which is you need model schools. You need to try this out. We need to experiment with it in places like Mooresville and other districts around the country, build the model schools, learn from their strengths and mistakes, and then scale this to every classroom in the country. And the last one, we call it investing in human capital, but I'm a teacher. So I don't see how we do this without the teachers. And ultimately, a big investment in professional development and teacher training is absolutely essential. We can do all the first 4, but if we do not invest in our teachers and make this transformation possible, much of what we do in 1, 2, 3, and 4 won't be as important. So investing in teachers is something I think everyone in this room and all of our colleagues around the country need to support as well. So that's the basic 5 points that we have. And it'd be great to have a discussion about it, but let me turn it over to my pal, Mr. Case over here.
Well, it's great to be here, and I celebrate what both the gyms have been working on, and just wanted to kind of bring in a supportive but sort of complementary perspective. I think it's worth noting, everybody has their own way of framing this, but when my dad was in 4th grade, television didn't exist, and the whole idea of using video as a way to inspire people, educate people, inform people wasn't really on the table. When I was in 4th grade, computers, the internet didn't exist, which is another way to create new tools. When my kids were in 4th grade, a lot of those things existed, and they went to great schools, but the way they learned was pretty much the same way I learned, the same way my father learned. So the world around us has changed, but the world in the classroom hasn't changed very much. And it's for a lot of the reasons that you're all familiar with and were discussed here this morning. And it's really got to change with teachers still being at the center. So I think there's too many people in the tech world who just think if you kind of sprinkle digital pixie dust on any problem, it will magically go away. This is a very complicated problem. Technology is a tool, but ultimately it's how people use those tools that really will drive this. But it clearly is a way that can be helpful. And the reason for that is we all know that people learn differently. Right now, our schools are generally set up with sort of a one-size-fits-all approach with something on the side for people with sort of special needs who are clearly learning in a different kind of way. But probably 90% or so, everybody assumes they're kind of, let's treat them all the same. Well, they're not all the same. Some people learn better from a lecture. Some people learn better from reading a book. Some people learn better from watching a video. Some people learn better from having a discussion. Most learn better from some combination of that, but the exact combination, the exact recipe is different for everybody. So recognizing that customizing learning solutions so they are more personalized, they are more adaptive to how people learn clearly will result in better learning outcomes. It's not going to happen overnight, but it needs to happen if we're going to continue to educate our kids and educate a workforce that will enable us to still be the leading economy in the world and the leader of the free world, which I think the broader context, I think it's worth thinking about. We didn't become the leader of the world by accident. 250 years ago, the United States was a startup. It was just an idea. The reason we're the leader of the free world is because we have the leading economy. The reason we have the leading economy is because we had a great entrepreneurial pioneering perspective, including the founders of the country. We had a great policy around immigration, really being a magnet for talent, which is one of the reasons I spent a lot of time on immigration. And we had the world's best education system. That's why we're the leading economy, and that's why we're the leader of the free world. So if we're going to continue to be the leading economy, we're going to continue to be the leader of the free world, we have to continue to have the most innovative entrepreneurial workforce. And while immigration is a problem we need to solve so we can continue to win this battle for talent, the most common question I get when I talk about immigration is, well, that makes sense, but shouldn't we be doing a better job of educating our own kids as opposed to essentially recruiting people from other countries to create the kind of the industries of the future? And of course, the answer is yes. But we've got to improve our education system if we're going to be able to be competitive in what is a much more competitive world. So this is not just a kind of a wonky policy debate about ed tech. This is about how our kids learn and how our country moves forward to remain an innovative, vibrant country and the leader of the free world. This is the core issue. Education is the core issue, and leveraging digital technologies in a smart way so that we can usher in a new era of more personalized, adaptive learning, I think is critically important. Now, there's some reason to be optimistic. There are a lot of challenges that have been framed here, but I spoke at a conference a few months ago in Arizona that ASU sponsors around innovation and education. And 5 years ago when they started, I was told they only had about 200 people there. This year they had 1,500 people there. So it actually is a lot of investment now in entrepreneurial ideas with venture firms focusing on this. That's the good news. The bad news, although it's in the long run going to be good news as it relates to this topic, is the vast majority of that investment is going to higher ed, not K-12. And the reason for that is some of the kind of, Jim talked about this, some of the issues that are complicated here are still complicated in higher ed. That actually is a difficult nut to crack, but viewed as somewhat easier than in the K-12 space. So I think what you'll see is a lot of the innovation will happen in other spaces like higher ed, and other spaces like kind of learning at home in a variety of different ways. And some of those ideas will then move into K-12. But picking up the pace here and creating more innovation and trying more things, because it's going to be an iterative process, is going to be critically important to kind of revolutionize what we do in K-12, what we do in learning, and position our kids and our country for a bright future.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me listening to this conversation already is that we are having multiple conversations about education in our country. And I would be curious how you see the Common Core is either helping to advance a national conversation that we historically haven't had, as Jim pointed out, and how that coheres, coordinates, or complicates with this conversation.
So my general take is, and you know, Secretary Duncan has been a huge. We're here as the lead commission significantly because of Arnie Duncan and Julius, who's going to be part of the next panel. Overall, my sense as a teacher myself is it's a good thing. I think the devil will be in the details and in the implementation, but overall I like it. I mean, to me, what Steve just said and what Jim is saying, Chelsea, about the fundamental importance of this and the disruptive nature of technology, I think are really true. So it's going to be interesting to see the Common Core happen, and I do believe it's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of politics, like there always is around everything, but I think that I think it's a positive step. But I think the one thing, there is no magic bullet when it comes to education. I think everybody in this room knows that. So the Common Core is one thing that relates to curriculum and how we're going to have that, how we're going to grow that. And for example, the learning rating stuff we're doing now has to be mapped to the Common Core because we see that's going to come. So all the work we're doing at Common Sense around that, we're totally mapping it to Common Core. So I believe it's going to happen. It'll be political. There'll be a lot of stuff. The phasing in of it will happen, all those issues. But it's just one piece. And that's why I think it's so important that we look at the technology piece too. Because I would argue, but I'd be interested to know what Jim, Steve, Chelsea, you think of it. I don't think the Common Core is going to disrupt I think it's going to be an advancement for K through 12 education. But I think technology can disrupt. I think we need disruption. I think our system, as my good friend Mr. Klein over there, I'm sure will say on his panel, is broken for many, many kids. So if the system is broken for millions of kids, you have to disrupt it. The Common Core can move it forward from a curriculum standpoint, but technology can have an even bigger impact. That's what I would say. So I don't know what you gents feel.
How do parents fit into this equation?
Well, I think parents, just to add on, then you guys go. I think parents are critical because I think one of the things that's happened is the home and school have merged now, increasingly because of technology. So that the way I think classrooms are going to change, so teachers' roles are going to change, but I think parenting roles are going to change because of the access that parents have to technology and to the content. And I think 5 years from now, when we all get back together here at the Pew Center, it'll be really interesting to see where we are. And Jim's little slide there of St. Peter's Square, how about 5 years from now on this one? I think parents are going to get way more involved because they're going to have an ability to do it via the technology.
One of the things that surprised me when we got into this, I was worried that we were going to get some sort of pushback from parents about devices and technology. So one of the things that we did very early was a poll. And the surprise to me was parents get it. Parents want this for their kids. Parents see the future. They're worried about privacy issues. They're worried about issues as to what's in the classroom, but most of them are already dealing with that in their children and media in hundreds of ways and every day. So the parents have been advocates on this. They want it done the right way, but they want it done. One of the overall issues that we're going to have as we talk about wiring the schools is on an equity basis, we're going to have to think about wiring the homes around it because the learning doesn't stop at the schools. We've been a little quiet on that so far at LEAD because, quite frankly, we want to start somewhere and get the wedge in. And we think once the devices and the Wi-Fi is in the schools, it will naturally start moving to the homes, and we will find ways to support that.
So as everybody knows, education is complicated, and the systems and the cultures and the funding, and there's a lot of aspects to it that make moving it, revolutionizing, if you will, challenging. And what likely will happen, and this has happened in other places, is the institutions themselves will evolve in a more evolutionary way. What will happen that is more revolutionary is the pressures around the periphery. And this happened with the personal computer revolution. If you basically look back at that, the story was most companies resisted personal computers. they basically were trying to essentially maintain a kind of command and control IT system. They didn't really want interlopers from the outside. They didn't want other devices connecting into their network. So most forbid people from even buying their own PCs. But enough people said, well, that's stupid. I'm just going to do it. And enough people started bringing in their devices. And eventually, the IT guy said, okay, well, I guess we have to figure out some way to, kind of at least protect ourselves from these crazy people, and we'll figure out some way to network them together. And over time, it evolved, obviously, to be very networked. If you had waited for whoever was leading the technology function, most of those companies, to approve it, it probably never would have happened. It really was pressure from the outside that kind of put the pressure on the system. The same thing is beginning to happen in healthcare, which has some similar dynamics in terms of sort of the institutional factors that limit, and the funding factor and other things that limit the ability for things to happen quickly in a really kind of flexible, innovative kind of way. But people are starting to wear different kind of wearable devices that are tracking different aspects of their health and are starting to essentially create their own digital health records. Well, guess what? In a few years, enough people will have those different devices. The doctors will start asking for people to actually, include them when their data is distributed, so they have that additional input when they're trying to make different kind of decisions. And that will force an acceleration of the adoption of digital health records and the integration of what happens sort of in the doctor's office in the hospital and what happens when you're home or in other places. The revolution will happen because of pressure from the outside. And my bet is that's what will happen here as well. Trying to get people to be more flexible, be more open, be welcoming some of these innovations around the periphery, make it easier, not harder, I think will be helpful. But it will be things that are challenging around from the outside. It will come from the kids, and it will come from the parents, in all likelihood, more than it comes from the teachers and the administrator, which is not saying anything negative about teachers and administrators. They have a tough job, and they're just trying to kind of figure out that job. They do not have the time to be paying attention to like the latest thing on TechCrunch that has something to do with education and technology. They're pretty busy. So things will happen from the periphery, and encouraging that innovation, that revolution, if you will, around the periphery, and then looking for moments of integration is the key. But my own bet is the revolution in education will happen in an evolutionary way because of the confluence of these factors, and it will take some time, so it will require some patience. But just being more open to the idea of innovation around the periphery, I think, will be a key cultural change that we can try to instill in our educational institutions.
We've been having some fun at LEAD recently because we're attacking the device issue now. So we're going out at the C-level of various corporations and saying, boy, here's a market that no one has yet owned. And someone is going to potentially own this market. And so the parent question has become a little less about the parents stopping it from coming into the schools. And we've been having some interesting conversations about what will happen in those homes when the kids start bringing devices home, and which devices and which language, which operating systems are going to go into the homes from the schools. And so this is, I think at the end of the day, the parent interface is going to be a very interesting one and may actually help us get some of the companies to step forward in this market.
Chelsea, just to pick up on what Steve and Jim are saying. So we have spent a lot of time over the past few years at Common Sense focusing on the potential downsides of technology for kids when used inappropriately, right? Issues related to kids' privacy. These are enormous issues. By the way, they're going to translate to school. So I want people to look at this because I'm a dad of four kids. So I think about this in that context as much as I do as a teacher or as an advocate. And we've looked at a bunch of stuff. The social and emotional and cognitive development challenges of too much time spent with digital media are real. And I think, by the way, that's why I think it's so good that we're the folks who are doing this. Because it is not, again, technology, the key phrase for me is used wisely. It has to, and used appropriately. It is not just technology. It's used appropriately. And that's critical. And I think that part of our challenge here in this room, as the people who are really going to lead this revolution, because I do think it's fair to call it a revolution, not just because he named his company Revolution for some reason, Steve. But the truth is, parents are worried about too much screen time. How do you turn screen time into learning time is what we say now. But also the downsides of the social, of what we call digital citizenship, Chelsea. You know, we've talked a lot about that, about kids learning the rules of the road for using devices properly, adults learning the rules of the road for using devices properly. Some of the downsides on the social and emotional development stuff. I've got 2 teen girls in my house, so I'm acutely aware of the potential downsides. So as parents, I agree, the demand is going to come from the outside, as it always does, and that will drive change much quicker. But we as educators and leaders of this have to also acknowledge that there need to be clear rules, that just unfettered use of technology without smart rules of the road and digital literacy and citizenship is not a smart way to go, because parents will reject that. They're going to be afraid of some of the downsides. So part of our job is to provide those clear rules and the proper wise use of technology, not just throwing devices. It's really interesting, Jim, looking at some of the stuff we've done in the device manufacturers. Can I tell us? I'm going to tell the Jim Coulter story. No. I got to do it. We meet with the head of Apple, and he with his BlackBerry, and it was a great one. But the point, I teased Jim about it, but the reason is the key for Apple or Samsung or whoever's going to put those devices in there, it probably won't be BlackBerry, is are they going to think about this as just a device that you're throwing into the classroom, or are you going to put the systems around it? That's why when you said the enterprise system before, it's not a consumer move. And so however we do this, we've got to think about how the parents are going to react to this, and are we going to put smart limits on it? I thank you for forgiving me for teasing you about that moment.
Well, Jim, you talked earlier about a Sputnik moment, but I don't know if we've really had a Sputnik moment. As much as you and Jim and your work have been privileged to see, Singapore having a national procurement system, or Erdogan in Turkey, personally being involved in purchasing 10 million devices for the Turkish school system. Right. We haven't had a moment on broadcast television right. or live stream that has really galvanized concern. Right. And so how do we, in kind of this moment in such a fractured media landscape, have that moment, or even absent a Sputnik moment, have a coherent conversation?
Yeah.
Chelsea, if we knew any correspondence, we might be able to
I'll work with you on that.
might be able to help on that. I think what I've traditionally said is I've had a Sputnik moment. I think it was Churchill who said the U.S. will do the right thing after they've tried everything else. In some ways, we've been out to see it, and we're beginning to see it in the press. This room needs to call it out. Yeah. Because I think one of the great wedges into the political system on this, and we will need those wedges, is international competitiveness. When we met with the educational minister in Korea, we asked them, well, are you testing the curriculum? How do you know it's better? Because our tendency here is the ed schools want to test it for 15 years before we try. And he looked at us with sort of a blank face. He said, why would you test it? We just know it's better. And we know that if we get technology into the hands of our kids, what they will do with it is going to be great. So they've just decided to do it. And that realization that people are making the top-down decision to move, which is antithetical to how our system works in education, means that we're going to have to move differently, just as we did around Sputnik. So those of us who are close to it, I think, have all had that moment. You only have to go to a one-to-one classroom to understand education will never be the same. But the problem is, I don't know, Mark, how many people want to go to Mooresville every year, right? We have to have more classrooms. We have to call it out on a national level. And we're trying to do that, but everyone in this room has to dedicate themselves to that process.
But I just want to add, I think one of the reasons that we've had an impact at LEAD is because, quite honestly, because of Jim being such an important business leader in this country, and it's having people like Steve speaking out. Because it can't, I've spent my life as a teacher and a child advocate. These guys have spent their life building huge businesses and being on the cover of Fortune magazine. And I'm not kidding when I say that the business community's driving of this is absolutely essential. Because the fear I have, as we try to do the goals that we laid out at the beginning, we're going to talk about today, is that this will get caught up in petty Washington politics or some of the BS that we see sometimes that prevent important gains and outcomes for kids. But if business leaders like Jim, who's really been the spearhead of the lead commission, it really has been Jim Coulter, more than any of us, and Steve are out there, and other business leaders are out there, talking about that we cannot not afford not to do this. I believe that's what will drive the Sputnik piece, in a way. I don't know what the Sputnik moment is. I agree. I actually think we're at it, though. I do believe that Jim's completely correct that we're at a tipping point. Don't you too, Steve? I mean, we're really at a tipping point. It's not 5 years out. This is going to happen now. But the business leadership is going to be key, and I think that's what makes you guys, in some ways, the most effective spokespeople, because we will not be competitive internationally and do all the things we need to do from a business and economic standpoint unless we deal with this now. And that's why I think what you guys do is so good.
I guess I'm generally optimistic that there's momentum building and the kind of investments beginning to flow that will fund some of these ideas, some of which will fail, many of which will fail, but some will break through, and they will be the kind of the iconic applications or brands or what have you that kind of inspire others to to do more things. And I do think the role of the business community is important. I think it's worth separating though the business community into sort of what large companies can do, kind of the Fortune 500, what the smaller entrepreneurial companies can do, and also what the investors can do. And I think a bias in this space towards a little bit longer term investment horizon will be important. That if you're focused on private equity, say, and you make a buyout of an educational play, sometimes the tendency would be pull back on the investment in some of these fringy things that might take 5 or 10 years to pay out, as opposed to doubling down on that. If you're a venture capitalist, some people are worried about investing in the K-12 space for exactly all these reasons. They think the path to monetization, a path to building sustainable companies with sustainable business models is too hazy, too cloudy, too unclear, and they're not willing to make that investment. So some folks, including some foundations now, are starting to make impact investments that's going to have more of a double bottom line kind of orientation to them. And impact investing is a great, this ed tech space is a great, particularly K-12 ed tech space, is a great example of the role of impact investing. If you're a foundation that cares about education, maybe taking 5% of your investment dollars and focusing it in funds that are doing investment with a long-term kind of horizon, more patient capital in this space, likely could pay more dividends than that same 5% just generating market rate returns, or that same 5% just being invested directly through grants and initiatives that you care about. So everybody has to figure out what the right play to run is, but a bias towards making this a priority and a bias towards encouraging more innovation, experimentation, entrepreneurship, if you will, and a bias towards taking a longer-term view, including from the business community, adopting more of a patient capital perspective, which is difficult in a world that really is focused on short-term returns, whether it be public companies that are watched, some would say every quarter, arguably every day, sometimes every hour, sometimes every minute, or even funds that are making investments that you'd think would be long-term investments, but people really are watching them every quarter, every year, and saying, "Well, I'm not sure where, I don't quite see the returns now," and say, "Well, I think this is going to be a longer-term bet. It's going to take longer, but in the long run, we think it's going to generate a great return." There's not as many people open to that discussion as we need if we're going to drive some of this innovation forward. So there is the business community, I think, is doing an important, making its contribution, whether it be larger companies funding things, entrepreneurial companies starting things, investors kind of driving things, or trying to kind of provide the capital necessary to drive things. But there's still more that could be done, and the business community generally needs to adopt the view that this is more of a priority, and even as they make their day-to-day decisions, they have to have a bias towards doing a little more here and doing it in a way that allows a little bit more experimentation and recognizes it's going to take some time for this revolution to happen.
So for all of you who, business is basically all about acronyms. So the one thing I want you to remember is TAM, T-A-M, Total Available Market. And every venture investment I've ever seen starts with TAM. So TAM in education is basically starts with how many schools are wired. So if only 10% of our schools are wired, the TAM gets real small. So now they're wired, how many of them have devices in their hands? So the problem in education, and what we're attacking in some ways at this level, is we have to increase the TAM. Why are people more interested in higher education? Think about it. All the higher education schools are wired. All the kids have devices. So even though it's only 1/4 the number of students at most, maybe 1/8, it's a bigger TAM because you've got the devices, you've got this, and it's quicker to market. So what we have to do in K-12, and excuse me for the business acronym, is we have to increase the TAM, which is why what the FCC is doing is so important, and why getting a few devices into the school and spreading them are so important. Because I believe, Steve, once the TAM is there, the money will come, right? If people believe there's actually a market, I see the Valley desperately wanting to, for both one and two bottom line reasons, wanting to invest, but there's no TAM. So we're going to attack that today, and I think it's starting to happen.
Well, I partially agree. As you expand the market, obviously, there's more market opportunity. I think there'll be more interest. But there is a concern, which I share in the education space, that the path for a young company with a great idea to get to market and to generate revenue is more difficult in this space than it is in most other spaces. Healthcare is similar, but most other spaces there's a clearer path to, right now the process, if you have that great idea, that's perfect for that 4th grade English class, what have you. Even if you have the perfect idea, you do not have a path to the market.
And
The
Steve, so
reason
then
for that.
What do you think then the role of the national government or even a state government would be to ameliorate those challenges and kind of help clarify that path? Not to guarantee success, because that also wouldn't necessarily be what we would want, not to foreordain which device or which curriculum would be most successful, but to have a clearer field of play.
So the answer is to figure out some way to dedicate some people and some dollars towards experimentation around the edges. The reason it's a problem is the distribution of these products is largely in the hands of an oligopoly, and these young companies do not have a path to be credible. And part of the reason that oligopoly is stronger in this market than other markets is because the institutional bias and even the politics of how decisions are made basically result in continuing down a path which is mostly around incrementalism, not about kind of radical innovation. So there are a lot of companies that have been, with good ideas that have been funded that have gone out of business because they couldn't figure out a path to the market, a way to break this kind of logjam. Now, some of those companies that have that role are beginning to experiment with how they leverage their infrastructure, their distribution, and try to either acquire or partner with or at least resell some of these other products. But I think some of the buyers, on the government side, are going to have to figure out ways to kind of unlock a little bit more flexibility and innovation, and not just rely on the traditional sellers of educational services, which is a relatively small group of relatively powerful players, but figure out other ways to do it. And there are probably opportunities to aggregate together some of the smaller players into a force that almost is distribution for the other guys that don't really have the power of the major players. Now, that is something that governments in other cases have done. They've put policies in place, for example, to make it a little easier for minority-owned businesses or small businesses to have a shot competing against the large government contractors, figuring out some way to unlock some path to market for people that aren't already kind of the powerful incumbents. But figuring out other ways to do that, I think, would result in enormous innovation, because that is a difficult problem that troubles a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of investors. Even if they have the greatest idea, they don't necessarily have a way to get that product or service to the market, given the way decisions are made in terms of how these essentially enterprise buyers make those buying decisions.
Jim?
Yeah, there's fault on both sides here. First of all, we have a system almost perfectly designed to stop innovation, right? So we've got a series of approved textbooks that are approved on 5-year bases. You've got a group of buyers who are not technologically savvy in most cases, who are used to safe purchases. They buy approved products that they've used for many years, and if they do it wrong, they lose their jobs. Right, so, and I have always asked myself in this process, if I was a school superintendent, what would I buy? And the market has not yet come up with a series of products that are viewed as safe. This is why part of what Common Sense Media is doing is really important. In the old days, we all used to read reviews of restaurants in the paper. Today, we go to Yelp or something where consumers are reviewing, or TripAdvisor, consumers are reviewing for us. Traditionally, education has had people sitting in ivory towers giving you the answer. We're now trying to move to a market where you can see what teachers think will work, and when